Hey there, gamer guys and gamer gals, it's me, your forgotten friend, the Indie Detective, back with a long-delayed episode of the Indie Detective Reviews. It's been about 3 years since my last episode, but I felt inspired to crack out a new episode about one of the most prolific publishers in the indie gaming space, PlayWay S.A. PlayWay was created in 2011 in Poland and has grown to become one of the largest games publishers in Europe. If you weren't aware, Poland is a powerhouse in games development, home to studios like CD Projekt Red, who made the Witcher series, 11-Bit Studios, who made This War of Mine, Frostpunk, and Moonlighter, and The Farm 51, who had the brilliant idea to 3D scan all of Pripyat, that's the home of Chernobyl for the uninitiated, and turn it into a horror game called Chernobylite. They now claim to have 44 development teams working under their publisher umbrella, aiming to publish 20 games a year, successfully completing titles even as 2020 brought the pandemic and its economic concerns to Eastern Europe. No matter what kind of gamer you are, I'm sure you've run across one of PlayWay's titles in the past couple of years. By far, their bread and butter have been simulator games made with Unity, which gives a lot of their games a very similar look and feel. They really made a splash in 2018 when they released House Flipper, and that game model has really taken off for them. They have other game types too. Scroll through their Steam list of their upcoming titles and you'll see things like first-person puzzle game Split, an RPG about being the Pope in Renaissance Europe, and a couple dicier adult titles, and also a thriller about the Zodiac Killer that launches on September 24th. But I'm not here to talk about their game catalog. It's 2020, I've been stuck inside the house for months, and sometimes you just want to do some virtual choring and enjoy the rewards of a job well done. That's something that job simulators are great at, creating a structured environment of lists and tasks where you get constant feedback and reward for your work, without the sweat and blisters of doing actual labor. So today on the Indie Detective Reviews, we're talking about 3 titles from PlayWay S.A.'s Job Sim series: Tank Mechanic Simulator, Train Station Renovation, and the brand new demo for Dinosaur Fossil Hunter. Before we jump in, if you're new to the Indie Detective Reviews series, we look into 3 things for every game to help you decide if it's right for you. First, we give you a basic overview of the game, things like its plot, genre, and development history. Then we go into some gameplay basics to talk about scoring, difficulty, controls, and the user experience, maybe even discussing some bugs the game has that would keep you from enjoying the game as intended. Lastly, we talk about viability and value, a segment especially important to early access titles, which is a rundown of cost, content, completeness, and frequency of updates to let you know whether the game will give you all the enjoyment you paid for. So with that intro out of the way, let's jump you into our first indie job sim, Tank Mechanic Simulator. Here's a big surprise for you. A guy on the internet who makes YouTube videos about video games is also really into military history. Bet you never saw that coming. When I started seeing trailers for Tank Mechanic Simulator around the end of 2019, announcing its launch in February of 2020, it was one of those automatic no-brainer wishlist items for me. Tanks are super cool. Restoring historic relics is a cool job, and the gameplay trailer was engaging enough. At that time, I think I'd played 2 other Polish job simulator games, namely House Flipper and Thief Simulator, both of which were pretty fun but had 0 tanks. And PlayWay had just published Plane Mechanic Simulator, which had you playing as a ground mechanic during the Battle of Britain in World War II, which is also very cool. But I have around 1,000 hours playing War Thunder and always wondered what it would be like to dig one of these metal monsters out of the mud, so I was like, yes please and thank you, and forked out $20 on launch day. But since you're here for an actual game overview and not just more personal anecdotes about how hot and bothered I get from tanks, here's the scoop. Tank Mechanic Simulator is the first game from a studio under PlayWay's umbrella called DeGenerals, a 5-person team from Łódź, Poland. The studio was founded in Q3 of 2017, and as mentioned before, the game was launched in Q1 of 2020, so it received about 2 full years of development at the point of launch. It is still in development, but at this point, it's where it's playable and enjoyable without there being any game-breaking bugs, but I'll discuss that further in a bit. Steam Spy reports that it has sold between 1 and 200,000 copies, which is incredible for such a small indie studio. There's not much plot to speak of in this title. You're a mechanic, you fix tanks, and a plot. That's completely par for the course in job simulator games. Nobody cares about how your avatar became a professional house flipper, and if you really do care about that, you're probably better off watching couples bonding over home renovations on HGTV. Games in this genre generally follow the same progression. You have a small job to do, you complete a checklist of tasks, you get unlock points. Unlock points make your job easier, or they unlock better jobs, so that when you get to more complex projects, you aren't still going at them with a spork and a prayer. Now, whether these games have an end game is something of a sticky point. Sometimes you run through all the content and it stops being fun, and spoilers, that applies to one of today's games. Sometimes you get into a replayability loop that makes the game a bottomless, chill experience. That's how I feel about Tank Mechanic Simulator, so let's touch on how the game plays to talk more about that. As a professional tank mechanic, your home is your garage, your arsenal is your tool belt, and your goal is to make money. If you played House Flipper, the experience will be very similar at first. You accept contracts to fix up tanks that people have on hand for some reason, and using your handy-dandy rust remover, sandblaster, and paint gun, you turn a junked old wreck into something presentable to your clients, who all have names like Jim and Cindy. After you make a fair bit of cash and reputation, you start getting emails from local farmers who, I don't know, bumped into something while farming beets and figure it's probably a tank or an unexploded bomb, and would you please be so kind as to dig a giant hole in their yard to get rid of it? The wrecks are always missing pieces of their hull or their engine, and according to the developer's blog, they'll soon have randomly generated holes punched in them. Unlike when you're taking fix-it contracts though, when you go and dig it out of a farmer's yard, this time the tank is yours. You own a tank! God, now I'm thinking back to the first Soviet KV-1 heavy tank that I dug out of the mud, and memories. Her name is Agnieszka. I should mention that the models you're working on are not 100% historically accurate. You don't need to pull the transmission apart or restore the 100 gears and sprockets? Are sprockets part of a tank? The parts that make up a suspension system on a vehicle weighing 40 tons, you don't need to do that. Nor do you need to take apart the whole block on a 12-cylinder engine or replace spark plugs. The game's aiming for accessibility and a sense of historical accuracy without insisting on such minute detail that it becomes tedious. Maybe that'll drive away some of the more obnoxious of historic pedants, but it really serves the game well. It was a huge relief to realize I only need to bolt together 6 sections of tracks, rather than dozens of individual track lengths. Ain't nobody got time for that. Unless you're playing My Summer Car, in which case, I guess you do have time for that. After you fork out a few $1,000 to replace the missing tracks, armor plates, and fuel hoses, give it a good scrubbing and a custom paint job, you get to give it a place of honor in an unlockable museum, which on top of being a very neat place to look back on all your past projects, also makes you a bit of cash on the side for your next project tank. Plus, you can take your new whip out for a test drive around your own personal tank track, or fire off a few rounds in the proving ground. Out on the track, you can really get a good idea of how much thought went into the tank models. The parts aren't just there to be taken apart and repaired, they actually function as part of the completed vehicle, and you can watch the cannon recoil and the suspension function just as they should in real life. At the time of making this video, the game has 15 vehicles you can repair, from Germany, the US, and the Soviet Union, but the vehicle viewer also has an empty category for British vehicles, which hints at that future development. And a stroll through the active devlog shows work-in-progress images for 6 other vehicles, including a couple World War I models. What passes for late game is basically taking on more tank retrieval missions to try to fill up your museum, which currently has 12 slots for tanks, so you can't fit everything, and generally just trying to kind of enjoy the laid-back repetition of the restoration process. This is where some gamers are definitely going to disagree with me, because I can keep enjoying a game after I've done a thing once, as long as it's not too much of a grind and the end product is rewarding. Some people don't play that way, they need a constant stream of new content to stay interested. That's totally legitimate, and if you're that way, I estimate your enjoyment will taper off around the 10-hour of gameplay mark, but I still boot up the game for a few hours at a time after 6 months and 40 hours of scraping rust off Panthers and Shermans. So if you're like me, you'll probably enjoy the game for much longer. My favorite section of any indie detective review for an early access game or project with ongoing development is the viability and value section, and I have inadvertently strayed into that territory by talking about my total game time. Let me lead off by saying that I find this game a great deal at $20 US. One of the things that PlayWay and its studios tend to do very well is to let the Unity engine and the wide array of available assets serve as a foundation so they can focus on the unique mechanics of each title. This saves them both time and money. But looking around some PlayWay games, you get the feeling that you're in an environment probably consisting of pre-existing assets. I noticed this a lot in House Flipper and Thief Simulator with things like books on the shelves and house textures. But, and this is a big but, I want to emphasize that the 3D artists on this game are doing a great job designing the tanks and the hundreds of individual parts and components that make them. Wheels, instrument panels, moving hatches and doors, all of them look great and work great in the game. The original 3D assets in the game are definitely a value add. I mentioned at the top that the game originally suffered from a few bugs at launch. When you're working with a team of 5 and launching into early access, bugs are pretty much a guarantee. When I first bought the game, I had a bug that made my antivirus software read the game's executable file as malware, which totally made it unplayable, and I wrote a scathing review on Steam. You know what rocks though? The developer in Poland got in touch immediately and they pushed out a hotfix in like 48 hours. you better believe I fixed my review. That's some amazing dev responsiveness. There are still bugs in the game, sure, but I don't run into them anymore. Mostly you can see the hilarious pictures of parts turning invisible in the Steam Community Hub. I would say my biggest complaint would be some of the FPS drop that I experienced when running around my museum area. Even though my NVIDIA 970 is starting to show its age, Unity instances usually run smoother than this, but your indie detective does not see bugs as being a major negative in this game. You know what else is awesome? Buying an early access game from a developer who actually releases regular logs and updates. This studio, DeGenerals, is doing a great job at that. This is what I mean when I talk about the viability of a game. You know, it really doesn't apply to games that are released in their final, fully developed form. Viability of an early access title, however, really relies on the dev team to keep up communications and stick to its release schedule to keep the interest of its players. Remember that this team has 5 people working for it. They still manage to release a devlog every 2 to 4 weeks. And it's still disease time 2020, so I'm sure they're not working at full capacity. The team has released 2 new vehicles since launch, the German and American half-tracks, and we've seen the in-development models, so we know the team is actively working on delivering even more value to the game, which means it has great ongoing viability. To wrap up this review of Tank Mechanic Simulator, I will say that even though I am a history geek and this game would have appealed to me anyway, I think that anyone who appreciates the laid-back experience of casually turning lumps of rust into impressive machines will enjoy this game. At $20, this is a great deal, and with how engaged the dev team is with its regular content releases and news updates, that value is only set to grow over time. As with any Unity game, I feel like there will be people who accuse it as being an asset flip title, but that's an absurd accusation when the developer team puts this much care into their original content, like this DeGenerals team has done for Tank Mechanic Simulator. It's an enthusiastic thumbs up from your indie detective. The next title in our job sim list is Station Renovation. This one's a little bit the same, but a lot of it different than how Tank Mechanic Simulator works, and I feel differently about its value. Let me explain a bit. Station Renovation, I'm just going to shorten it to TSR so I don't run out of breath, is made by Live Motion Games, which is a significantly larger studio of 20 plus employees, according to the 2 minutes I spent on LinkedIn, operating out of Warsaw. To date, TSR is their only full launch, but it looks like they're close to launching Car Trader Simulator, in which you play My Father's Worst Nightmare and buy totally wrecked cars and flip them to customers who aren't smart enough to run Carfax. That game has a free demo on Steam. Actually, 2 free demos, the demo and then Car Trader Simulator Welcome to the Business. I have no idea what the difference is. Go find out for me, will ya? I can't imagine what it's like to work at Live Motion Games. They have so many games in production right now that their project managers must be out of their minds. Take a look at their website, which lists 4 games in production, and their Steam page, which lists another 6 games upcoming for a total of 10, not including Car Trader, but including, holy shit, Drunk Santa Simulator, FatX Courier Simulator, which I guess is going for comedy by making you a fat, dancing, clumsy delivery man, turn-based combat title Gunslingers and Zombies, and Chernobyl Liquidator Simulator, where you, quote, work hard to contain the radiation, help the people, and conspire with the government. Christ, those poor employees. Despite the totally frenetic nature of Live Motion Games' upcoming catalog, TSR really is a straightforward job sim. It isn't trying to be funny or satirical or really even that original. It is a lot like House Flipper in that you're given a run-down or abandoned property and asked to turn it into something nice. Like Tank Mechanic Simulator, it was the first title for its parent studio. It got 2 years of development and it released in April 2020 after a demo, which let you play through its tutorial. According to Steam Spy, though, it has only sold in the neighborhood of 20 to 50,000 copies, which is fine but not phenomenal. And that's a really loose figure, yeah I know, but that's kind of just how Steam Spy works. It's the best data publicly available. Also similarly to House Flipper, TSR plays out across several maps, so you need to progress through them linearly, reaching an adequate level of completion in the earlier stages before you're allowed to progress on to the next. You start out in small rural stations and reach increasingly urban locales until the last station, which is immense. Generally, every station has its own unique element for you to solve, like draining a flooded basement or fixing a train wash, which keeps things more interesting than pick up garbage, clean graffiti, buy benches, repeat. But even the worst stations you are presented, and one is supposed to have survived a major flood, they still look foundationally sound. The brickwork is nice and polished and overhead awnings look freshly painted. They don't exactly scream, "I'm a derelict station that desperately needs your help." But the absolute worst stations, which have whole wrecked trains lying about, you can't do anything about those wrecks. So your finished product is still a junkyard. It doesn't have the same sense of achievement as flipping a burnt out house or restoring a rusted tank to working order. Speaking of Tank Mechanics Simulator, just like in that game, you're ostensibly running a business, but even from the beginning, money's never really an issue. You're supposed to separate waste into different bins in order to recoup scrap value out of them, but it's not strictly necessary, since the actual pay for the renovation is more than enough to offset the cost of furnishing each new station, and you have no expenses outside the mission. The only currency of real value, like many other job simulators, are stars or experience that completing each new station awards you with, which you can spend to buy better equipment or to speed up your work. I recently saw a new creative way of dealing with currency in a job simulator in Hardspace Shipbreaker, in which you aren't trying to earn money so much as pay off a massive debt. If this game made you track your finances and arbitrarily added some expenses like rent or fuel or a business loan, it would motivate players to pay more attention to the dollars they actually earn and give them more of a sense of achievement when they do save money. I don't really know what else there is to say about the gameplay, which is odd because this is usually the longest section of each review, but it just feels so samey to House Flipper that not much is standing out to me. I can happily say that I never run into a game-breaking bug. I can't remember the game ever crashing on me, and even the largest, most asset-heavy stages, I didn't notice any frame drops or graphics stutter. The catalog of furniture and decorations that you can add to your station is adequate but not great. I would say it's just enough to let you add some character to your stations, but insufficient to create really grand interiors. Additionally, there are a lot of elements of stations that I wish I could change, but have furniture or other elements that are locked in place. You can't change the color or textures of the walls or floors. I did feel that sense of achievement having completed each map, and I'm sure you probably would also, but I hesitate to give the game any unqualified endorsement for reasons that I'll touch on in a second. Now before I get there are two parts of the game that I actually really appreciate: the reward system and the train models. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of trains, like I can't specifically name manufacturers and models, but I think they're great to look at, and the 3D artists did a really great job of creating a variety of locomotives, passenger carriages, and freight cars for the game. With each station you renovate featuring its own unique combination of cars and locomotives, the game rewards you for completing more tasks by giving you toy train models, which you can access back in your home. It's nothing that's going to keep you entertained for hours, like a real model train hobbyist would, but it's a creative and original interactive reward system that I've only ever seen in a handful of other games. Now for me, the true downside of TSR's format is its lack of endgame. Once you've completed each train station, you unlock a sandbox mode which lets you revisit any station but with unlimited money. But since money is never a constraint to begin with, sandbox mode is not really the reward it's intended to be. You simply reload into a map that you've already completed with the same garbage and graffiti on the walls, but this time you don't receive any rewards at the end. As I mentioned before, none of the stations really wowed me with the final result. The nicer stations look a little nicer, and the worst stations still look pretty bad, so I never felt the drive to complete it a second time. And what was probably the nail in the coffin, the last stage requires no, quote, renovation work, it's just a massive amount of furnishing. So it's just a huge grind as you place 100 benches, 40 trash cans, 20 clocks, and 60 planted shrubs around a huge map. It's super grindy, and it just made me want to turn the game off. Alright, moving on to the viability and value of TSR, it's actually not a bad value at $15. If the gameplay footage does look interesting to you, and it looked really interesting to me at first too, you can still download the demo for free on Steam and decide for yourself whether it's interesting. While I've mostly been a downer on the gameplay cycle, I will mention the game is still in development, and the dev team has posted a couple updates with concept art for 2 upcoming maps, one modeled on an alpine ski resort with a gondola lift, and the other on a rural Louisiana-inspired station, complete with swamp and stilted buildings. This is generally something I would say adds great value rating to the viability of the game, but one thing really worries me. The devlogs don't give any indication of how far in development the new content is, and I now know the team is working on 10 other projects. I will definitely be reinstalling the game in the future when these new areas unlock, but until then, it probably won't take up space on my hard drive. Now I know we're really far into this video, but I want to take a second to talk about the dramatic changes that often take place between when a studio launches a gameplay trailer and their launch day. What I'm playing here is the media trailer for TSR, which shows a lot of functionality that does not exist in the game's current state, most striking being the existence of NPCs actually wandering through a completed station, and the player driving a train. This trailer is from 2018, and obviously there are going to be some big changes as the game goes through development, but these seem like major omissions. Seeing people actually enjoying my work would be a huge morale booster for me, and seeing it truly come to life with trains coming and going from the station would be such an amazing technical achievement that I would be praising the game for that alone. But the similarities between where they were in 2018 and where they are today, all we can do is pick up trash, fix windows, and scrub graffiti. That seems to point at not just a game being released in an early access state, but it appears that whole mechanics are actually being cut to fit into the studio's bloated production schedule. I feel like Ferris Bueller, who got a computer when his sister got a car. I was promised I could drive a train, but instead I got a model train set that derails anytime I get the switches wrong. If you've watched any of the other Indie Detective Reviews episodes, which, hey, if you haven't, look for a link on the right, you'll notice I don't tend to review too many games negatively. One of the reasons for that is I have a hard time hate playing games. I did like playing this for a little bit, now I don't. It's a bit like dating someone you really like at first, then over time you realize there isn't anything beyond your initial impressions and you need more to life than watching reruns of Grey's Anatomy. What confuses me is that TSR still has a very positive rating on Steam, and they look like legit reviews. Some people agree that the game gets very samey very quickly, but a lot of reviewers less than 10 hours in the game agree that it's laid back and relaxing. So if you want something a little different to give you an hour or two of relaxation, I recommend picking up the demo and deciding for yourself whether the $15 is worth a moderately enjoyable but finite gaming experience. In conclusion, it's a thumbs down from your indie detective. The limited content, both in terms of the maps themselves and how you can decorate them, limits my enjoyment playing through the first time, and now that I'm at the end, I don't have the desire to jump back in. I don't feel like I got $15 worth of entertainment from it, and even though they promise more content in the future, the game has been out for 4 months without a content drop. The studio has far too many irons in the fire for me to have confidence that TSR is any kind of priority for their team. Moving on. Releasing a Prologue version of a game seems to be the PlayWay marketing strategy. I dare you to search the Steam store for the word Prologue. Spoilers, it gives you a lot of results, and a lot of those are PlayWay titles. Dinosaur Fossil Hunter is one of 2 such demos just released by Pyramid Games in Lublin, Poland, the other being Occupy Mars, but today we're going for the archaeologist career track instead of astronaut because it comes first alphabetically, and I've arbitrarily decided that that matters. Pyramid Games shares a lot in common with our other subjects from today, other than being Polish, of course. Like Live Motion, they have a bunch of other games in the works, but Dinosaur Fossil Hunter and Occupy Mars are their first 2. Pyramid has actually been around in other forms since 2011, launching a handful of mobile and Switch titles before their first PC game, Ultra Cosmos, launched in 2018. Maybe its comic book art style and point-and-click adventure story rubbed people the wrong way, maybe it just wasn't marketed well, but even at $5, it never sold well. Ultra Cosmos just got really mixed reviews. But whatever happened to the studio after that, it seems that things have totally changed at Pyramid Games. They're working on 8 titles, including Dinosaur Fossil Hunter and Occupy Mars, all for PC, but ranging from casual, low-poly farming life and Zookeeper to a really hardcore-looking turn-based isometric RPG called Kingslayer Tactics. They have 2 other games that fall into the first-person job simulator model, but focus on science and engineering. First, we have Rover Mechanics Simulator, which seems an extremely detailed recreation of modern science exploration technology, but then there's Soviet Space Engineers, which hilariously lets you build Soviet-era rockets and satellites out of actual scrap. Dinosaur Fossil Hunter landed on Kickstarter at the end of May and reached about half of its funding stretch goals, bringing in about $36,000 Canadian in seed money. Hopefully by now it's occurred to you that this game focuses on paleontology, not archaeology, so you get exactly how arbitrary I am. Don't post anything in the comments about it. Let's focus on the gameplay of our Prologue title. Dinosaur Fossil Hunter promises to let us live our greatest Dr. Grant from Jurassic Park fantasies by going on paleontological digs in various locations, hoofing it out in our trusty 4x4 to find dino bones encased in sedimentary rock. Unlike our other 2 games, this one actually has something of a storyline in the prologue, as our character falls more in love with paleontology as he grows up and lands a college internship that sends us on our first dig. After squeezing our car past some obstacles, I guess someone on the dev team is a fan of SnowRunner, we come to our dig site, find some interesting rocks and bits of bone sticking out, and then pack them away for later cleaning. The whole retrieval sequence plays out a lot like that in Tank Mechanics Simulator, but even in this early stage of development, it's much more fleshed out. The driving bit isn't anything special, but the process of packing each fossil in plaster and then a shipping crate is already much more in-depth than Tank Mechanics' process of dig here, fade to black, hose off the tank with a pressure washer, fade to black, tank is packed and ready to go. And you know how I've been praising the 3D artists this whole episode for the original content they build into their games? Just wait until you see these dinosaur skeletons. For the prologue, we get to carefully restore 3 chunks of hold on, let me get this right, Ornithomimus. Just in this first chunk, which is an arm and a hand, there are 21 bones that need to be individually washed and restored. Remember what I said about Tank Mechanics Simulator going for accessibility over complete historical accuracy? This one takes the complete alternate tack. It gives you the options to individually brush off each and every knuckle and claw and vertebrae and reassemble them, or you can assign the cleaning process to a coworker, saving you a huge amount of time. This is brilliant. It means that whether you're a die-hard dino fan who wants to take apart every piece of the process, or you're more casual and don't like the grind, you still get to enjoy the process of building dino skeletons. We move on to the next step in the process, which is putting together an exhibit for your collection. The demo gives you 2 ornithomimus skeletons to play around with, and maybe I'm just dumb, but I could not figure out how to make use of a lot of the options I saw in the game's menus. I got how to cycle between 6 different poses, but not how to combine the skeletons onto a single platform or to add extras like rocks and grass. Of course, I thought this may just not be available in the demo, but then I looked at the amazing creations some people have added to the Steam Community Hub, and I ended up feeling just a little frustrated at my inability to add decoration elements in this current form of the game. I hope they do a lot of tweaking and refining this mechanic, because if there's one thing I learned from my time fixing tanks, it's that I love a good museum. And this is the part of the game that will keep me hooked into it for a long time. Now, I don't want to spoil too much at the end of the prologue for you, because I encourage you to download it yourself and give it a go, but suffice it to say you get a taste of some much bigger fossils. It took me just over 90 minutes to complete the prologue, and that's with having cleaned all the available bones manually and having to repeat a connect the dot drawing because I lack the fine motor skills of a 6-year-old. It's difficult to really talk about the viability and value of the game that hasn't yet launched or even announced a firm launch date or price. All I can do is speculate the launch will be around December, because that's the estimated delivery period posted on Kickstarter, and the price is probably going to be in the neighborhood of $20. If you were lucky enough to jump on the Kickstarter campaign, you could get a key for the game for as little as $14.50, which is $19 Canadian. And at higher tiers, they even threw in keys for Tank Mechanics Simulator and Rover Mechanics Simulator. They have announced that the game at launch will have 9 different dinosaur species across Montana, Wyoming, and Utah in the United States, which, if the amount of detail is similar to that shown in the demo, will be more than enough to keep my interest for probably 15 to 20 hours of gameplay. Honestly, if I were Pyramid Games, I would seriously be considering the launch price to be in the $25 price range, especially if the plan is to continue rolling out new dinosaur species and free updates. The attention to detail displayed in the prologue just makes me think that price point would be worth it. Well, that's it for what I'm officially going to call episode 8 of the Indie Detective Reviews series. I've been out of the YouTube game for a long time now, so I hope some of you watching are the awesome people who hit subscribe all the way back in 2017. If you're new, hitting the thumbs up button and subscribing will be all the motivation I need to come back with even more indie gaming action. We're at 72 subs when I dropped this, so I hope we continue to grow into the future. I also have a Twitch channel where I'll be recording the raw footage for new episodes in the future, so head on over to twitch.tv/TheIndieDetective, yes there is a THE at the beginning, and hit the follow and notification bell so you'll see me go live. I will see you next time with more excellent indie titles, gamer guys and gamer gals, but until then, this is your Indie Detective, signing off.